All right, great. Good morning, colleagues. Thank you for joining us for today's stakeholder validation workshop. Today, we are going to be looking at the opportunities for unlocking finance in South Africa's just energy transition, and most importantly, what those findings and lessons mean in terms of the implications for social dialogue here in South Africa. By ways of introduction, my name is Lebogang Molaisi. I head up research and policy for the Presidential Climate Commission. For today's specific engagement, I will locate this in the role that the PCC is currently playing as the lead for the Partnership for Action on the Green Economy, the PAGE program, which the PCC is currently leading in collaboration with a number of UN agencies, particularly the ILO as well as UNEP, specifically for today's discussion. Within this particular partnership, what we in the PAGE program have sought to do is to establish a forum for social dialogue on the just transition. And within this process, what it has culminated in is a number of discussions that we have been hosting on the synthesis of specific policy and technical questions that we are seized with in terms of the just transition. So for today's specific conversation, this is not the first validation workshop that we have been hosting to synthesize a number of key questions for our transition to a low carbon economy. The first one looked at specifically the coal landscape, and today we're looking at the opportunities for unlocking finance in South Africa's just transition, which is now the second validation workshop that UNEP is helping us consolidate our thinking around in collaboration with the CSIR. So within this process, what has happened to date is that through the process of social dialogue, which we intend to have in NEDLAC, we will be providing technical input to social partners, which is business, labor, government, and community, to engage on these critical issues. The colleagues who are on this call are no stranger to the fact that in order for us to achieve our just transition, a number of policy levers need to be unlocked simultaneously. And again, through social dialogue, we have been exploring the need for labor market tools, issues related to the economy and economy diversification, as well as issues related to governance. And today we'll be looking at, again, the finance question and the need to unlock the necessary finance for us to achieve a just transition. I must indicate for today's discussion, the CSIR has actually done quite a bit of work to help us consolidate and synthesize the various evidence that exists on climate finance as well as finance for a just transition. But they've taken this work a bit further in terms of what all of this then means in terms of the implications for social dialogue. And most importantly, what has worked well in terms of innovative financial instruments across a number of geographies, particularly for emerging economies such as South Africa. So I can already see that it's already starting to happen within the chats. If colleagues could begin to introduce themselves so that we have a broad sense of who is in the room, that would be really beneficial. In the meantime, I will just do a broad sort of overview of today's agenda. The UNEP technical support team, who's been providing technical support to the PAGE program, will come in just to do some contributions in terms of their support for page 2.0 here in South Africa, and just an overview and scope of the study that we are validating here today. And then after that, we will get into some presentation of key findings and validation, and a validation session one, which the colleagues from CSIR will lead. And then after that, we'll have a moderated discussion. After that, the CSIR will still continue in terms of providing climate finance opportunities in the next presentation. And then the CSIR will then conclude with just some broad policy recommendations, but most importantly, locating that in terms of the implications for social dialogue. After that, our colleague from the ILO, Matilda Dalquist, will then get into some of the issues from the synthesis report, and then we will get into the closing remarks as well as next steps. The invitation to attend this workshop did come with the report that we are looking at today, but the presenters will go into the presentations just to get everybody up to speed. With that said, everybody is welcome to today's session. Please feel free to engage. You don't need to be an expert on climate finance. The way that the report is sort of positioned is just to give people an overview in terms of what opportunities exist, what has been done elsewhere that is innovative, that can be explored. But most importantly, it builds on just the various pockets of work that have been done on climate finance. I've also taken note of just a lot of the work that's come out of just existing PCC knowledge, but what this study does quite well is that it does a really good synthesis of the existing knowledge and clearly outlines what those implications are for social dialogue as we seek to have social dialogue on the just transition for South Africa. Without any further ado, I would then like to hand over to you, Luciana, to come in just to provide some overview in terms of your contributions to page 2.0. Thank you. And then you can hand over to Josephine.
Okay, thank you very much, Lebohang, and hello, everyone. I'm Luciana Fontes de Meira, and I'm representing the United Nations Environment Program. And this work is a pleasure again to be here. And let me start by just thanking the Presidential Climate Commission for convening us once again, our colleagues at the ILO as the coordinating page agency, the CSIR team for the substantial work behind the report we're validating today, and of course, all of you that are here today, representatives from the government, organized labor, business, academia. Thank you so much for making the time to engage in this work and for the interest in helping us to make the best of this work possible. So as many as of you may know, South Africa was selected as part of the Partnership for Action on the Green Economy, or PAGE as we call, country program in its phase 2. We have a long engagement before in South Africa for 5 years, and now we are continuing this work for a bit longer. And this new work is anchored in the country's framework for a just transition and actually contribute to the implementation of South Africa's just transition objectives, including, of course, those reflected in the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan. And what makes this engagement distinctive is that it responds to a request from the Presidential Climate Commission to actually support social dialogues on the transition from coal-based energy systems towards a more sustainable and equitable energy future. So we think that these dialogues provide a very important institutional space where the government, the organized labor, business communities, and other stakeholders can engage, can deliberate, exchange ideas, and of course works towards consensus on the socio-economic and employment implications, of course, of this transition. And UNEP role specifically in this partnership is that of a contribute partner, and our contribution is technical, as this work demonstrates. We work hand in hand with the Energy Research Center at the CSIR, and we are providing the analysis and evidence-based that the just transition dialogues needs to function. Because the reality is social dialogue without evidence risks becoming an exchange of positions, right? So social dialogue grounded in sharing credible data is where negotiation and ultimately an agreement, we hope, becomes possible. So it's important to see today report in a wider context. So that's why I'm here as well. This is not a standalone piece. Today we are actually talking about this piece specifically, but earlier this year, we completed the first study under this engagement, which was a baseline synthesis of South Africa coal landscape, which mapped the sector's economic significance, its policy environment, key players, and labor market implications. Many of you, I think, were part of this, of validating that report, and its findings directly inform the one before you today. So thank you very much for the previous comments on the report. And this is not the end either. This is not the final report. So we'll see each other again in the future, I hope. So the finance report will be followed by the socioeconomic impact analysis of the coal phase down, looking at jobs, GDP earnings, and industrial output, and building all of these, the policy recommendations to be brought to the social dialogues. So I would ask you to think of these reports as small pieces of a big puzzle we're trying to build here. Each stands on its own, but they are designed to be complementary and read together. So what comes before informs today reports, and today report will inform what comes afterwards. And together they form the evidence-based for the social dialogues deliberations. So today piece of the puzzle is finance. Financing joys are never purely technical, as we know, that determine who bears the costs, who carries the risks, and which communities and workers see the benefits. And that is each chapter of these reports closes with guiding questions framed specifically for social dialogues. So today is a validation workshop, so that means that this draft is yours to test, validate what reflects your reality, flag what does not, and tell us which recommendations are genuinely useful for the social dialogues. Your input will be directly shape the final report and the final overall work that I mentioned. With that, let me now hand over to my colleague Josephine Muzango, who will walk you through the overview and scope of the study. And thank you very much once again. And over to you, Josephine.
Well, thank you so much, Luciana. And good morning, good afternoon. Project the slides. I'm Josephine Mosango, a technical expert at UNEP supporting macroeconomic modeling within the PAGE team that Luciana is leading. And one of these projects I'm supporting is the South Africa PAGE 0.20. So you can go to the next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, so as Luciana mentioned, this study falls within a broader work that is within PAGE 2.20. We are conducting technical support to provide analysis and evidence-based understanding of the just energy transition. You can go to the next step, next slide, sorry. Yeah, so this broader work within UNEP that we are contributing to South Africa's PAGE 0.20 consists of 5 activities. And the first activity, as Luciana mentioned, we completed the review of the coal sector report. One of the key highlights of the report is that it identified that one of the key aspects that the transition is identifying is that it's not just based on the issues of transitioning to energy sector, but also other aspects like the financial aspects, the regional risks that are required to be taken into account when analyzing the just energy transition. So it is very important to not just look on the the scope of work just on the energy transition, but energy mix as a transition, but also regional, physical, and job related aspects that are affected by the transition. The second activity is ongoing, where we'll develop a model, the IJD model, that will look on the value chain, supply value chains, input-output model, and that will be coming soon, and it's the core value chain. The third activity, it has not yet started. It is based on outputs that will be from activity 1, 2, and 4, where we'll develop draft policies and strategies. And then in activity 4, this is now based on what we are presenting today, where we'll be validating the work and getting insights on whether the findings are relevant for supporting just energy transition and social dialogues. And then the fifth activity is providing technical advice during the social dialogue roundtables, where we will be presenting the outputs from activity 1, 2, 3, and 4. One of the aspects that I would like to highlight is that we did have a functioning steering committee members from 8 institutions that we would like to acknowledge that have been contributing to the work that we are presenting here. We have stakeholders from ESCOM, from PCC, NEDLAC, Mineral Council South Africa. We also have civil society, University of Witwatersrand. So we are having a committee that is providing input on this specific documents. Then we can go to the next slide. So just looking on the overall impact of the outcome of the UNEP support, we are looking on strengthening the capacity, the national capacity in providing evidence-based analysis. We are also providing informed evidence-based social dialogues. We are also ensuring that we provide enhanced understanding and ability of financial and resources and implementing sectoral transition policies within PCC and supporting the implementation of the policies that will be developed, and then strengthening the foundation to coordinate, endorse, and guide implementation during the social dialogue. Specific study that we are presenting today. The study reviews a wide range of financial instruments. It also looks at enabling conditions that are supporting the climate finance or are required to attract the climate finance in South Africa. And the scope also goes beyond looking on energy-specific opportunities, but also cover other related financial opportunities within sectors such as water, agriculture, transport, biodiversity, waste management, just to mention but a few. And then, as also Lebo mentioned, it looks at case studies from other countries that South Africa can learn. And also, one of the important aspects is also the emphasis of the social dialogue and inclusivity in order to ensure that how financing decisions are considered affect the different vulnerable groups that are affected by the transition. And then just as an overall aspect is the study looks at the broad and practical review and the recommendations of how South Africa can strengthen its climate finance system to support just a validation workshop. So as the CSIR presents, we will be looking for inputs and support inputs and insights on how the findings they are relevant in informing the social dialogue. So we'll have CSIR will be presenting the results. So I hand over to Lebohang to welcome CSIR. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josephine and Luciana. That was really, really good. I think you did a better summary and were more eloquent than what I was in terms of the intention that we have for today's session and how it's firmly located within just the broader ambit of consensus building. So this is how we're really taking the work forward, synthesizing it and embedding it in social dialogue to achieve the aim of yes consensus building, so that platforms of social dialogue, I like the point that you used, Luciana, are not just an exchange of positions, but rather a consensus building exercise. So with that said, I'm going to hand over to you, Herbert, to take us through session 1, and you have the tough task of doing this, all of it, including discussions, in 20 minutes. So I'm going to hand over to you, Herbert. Herbert, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone, for joining this stakeholder validation workshop. My name is Herbert Ntuli. I'm a researcher and resource economist based at the CSIR in Pretoria, and my work basically spans a wide range of environmental economics, from water resources, forestry, wildlife conservation, and the whole range of other issues, including pollution. But currently, I'm focusing on climate finance, carbon finance, and carbon markets, and issues to do with MRVs and stuff like that. So the purpose of sorry, there is something. The purpose of today's session is to present the findings of a study that we did based on a scoping review of climate finance opportunities, the barriers, financing instruments, and lessons from international and South African experiences. So we would particularly value your feedback in terms of flagging, validating and flagging the results as we proceed. I'm not sure if the presentation is still on. Something looks like happened on the presentation. I can't see it on my side.
Yeah, neither can I. Maybe if Janita can re-share.
Reshare, yeah. Janita, are you still there? Maybe we lost her. Yeah, so while we are waiting for Jeanette, let me just walk you through the presentation again. So the first session, I'm going to look at to talk about the introduction, background of the study approach, the financial instruments, and also the key barriers to adopting these instruments. And in the second session, we are going to look at the opportunities for financing a just transition. We also consider case studies, international case studies, and also lessons from South Africa, and what we can learn from these international case studies. And then finally, we will look at the policy recommendations and also taking into consideration the potential priorities for future social dialogue and actionable project pipelines that can be implemented to achieve the objectives of the social dialogue.
So I don't think Jeanette is back, but my suggestion. Oh, there we go. There we go. The slides are coming.
Okay. Oh, yeah. So can you move to the next slide, please? Yeah, next slide. Yeah. So I will basically start with the introduction. To begin with, access to climate finance is one of the most important ingredients for climate action in developing regions. And South Africa is not an exception to this. Yet we observe, based on evidence, that Africa receives less than 4% of the global total climate finance flows, which is very little in terms of the nature of the climate work that we need to do. So South Africa faces financing challenges to support climate action and the just energy transition. So if we look at the case of South Africa, existing evidence actually showed that the current climate finance flows remain substantially below the levels required to meet national climate objectives, decarbonization commitments, and adoption needs. So the fig on the right actually shows a comparative analysis based on Mitchell et al., a study that was done considering the period 2019 to 2021. So it shows the current levels, annual flows, and also the requirements for net zero and the requirements for NDC. So you can actually see the magnitude of the gap in climate finance. So this study was therefore undertaken to identify opportunities for unlocking climate finance across key sectors of the economy, while ensuring that climate financing contributes exclusively to developmental outcomes and the energy transition in particular. So the study also examines the enabling conditions required to attract investment and strengthen evidence-based social dialogue and climate finance decisions. So the study had three main objectives. First, to assess opportunities for unlocking climate finance to support South Africa's sectoral and thematic climate policies. And second, to identify enabling policy, governance, institutional conditions required to mobilize finance. So finance is at the center of the discussion today, of the presentation. So the last but not least is to strengthen evidence-based social dialogue around climate finance and just transition pathways. So social dialogue becomes a critical part of the whole issue about climate finance, about climate action. So the study was based on a scoping review. So the thematic representation of the study approach is shown in the diagram below. So moving on to the next slide, the study employed a comprehensive, can you go back? A comprehensive review of international and South African literature on climate finance. Sorry, Jeanette, can you go back? Yeah. On climate finance instruments, barriers, and governance system, and just transition initiatives. Evidence was drawn from published journal articles, scientific reports, policy documents, documents from development finance institutions or reports, and international case studies. So the process used to select these records was based on a scoping review and a scientific approach, a methodology that is acceptable following the PRISMA framework and a strict inclusion and exclusion criteria that was developed for the purpose of this study and agreed upon. So ultimately, a sample of about 157 records was retained from a total of 2,400 records that were initially identified based on popular databases like Scopus, like Google Scholar, and the like. So their distribution is shown on in the pie chart and also the bar chart, the distribution by type and region. So the review focused on identifying practical lessons that can inform South Africa's climate finance strategy while recognizing the country's unique socioeconomic and institutional context. So the findings synthesize these lessons into a set of opportunities, barriers, and policy recommendations. So we now move on to examine the main climate finance instruments currently available on the market, how they compare with one another, and the major barriers limiting climate finance mobilization in South Africa. So the next slide, you can move to the next slide. The next slide shows that in the review, I think if you can wait and then until I tell you to move, Jeanette. Thank you. Yeah, so the review identified a diverse range of climate finance instruments currently being used globally and to a varying degree within the South African context. So these include grants, concessional loans, blended finance structures, green bonds, sustainability-linked loans, carbon markets, public-private partnerships, where organizations come together, public and private organizations, to address the cause, guarantees, equity investments, and climate funds. So the fig on the right there basically shows that each instrument serves a different purpose. So the key functions of these instruments differ according to the objectives that the planners want to achieve. So some help reduce investment risk, while others mobilize private capital, while some are designed to support vulnerable communities and ensure that transition costs are shared fairly. Based on this result, it is important to note that this instrument presents different opportunities for South Africa as well. So some are being fully utilized, while some South Africa is still exploring and developing these instruments and platforms that can, this instrument can be deployed. So the key message here is that no single instrument can deliver the transition on its own. So we need a mix of these instruments to achieve the transition objectives. To better understand which instruments offer the greatest potential for South Africa, we move on to the next slide, where we rank these instruments based on a specified criteria. So the study assessed the instruments using 5 criteria. So the first one is the current implementation, which of these instruments are being implemented in South Africa. The second one is scalability, which instruments are scalable in the South African context. And we also considered institutional feasibility, contribution to a just transition, and private capital mobilization potential. So using this criteria, the instruments can be ranked in 3 tiers, as you can see on the diagram. So the results suggest that blended finance, concessional loans, climate finance facilities, guarantees, and green bonds emerge as particularly important because they combine scale with relatively high implementation potential. So this is the first tier that we are talking about, which has got a high practicality and immediately applicable for South Africa. So South Africa has developed the environment and the platforms to deploy these instruments. In the second tier, we see that these instruments are moderately practical and strategic, of strategic importance to South Africa. South Africa is still developing these instruments. And also on the third tier there, we see carbon markets. So these are emerging or supplementary instruments that can be deployed. So there's still more work that needs to be done for carbon markets to be functional in South African context and also in Africa as a whole. However, different instruments play complementary roles, and their effectiveness depends heavily on governance and institutional capacity, as you will see later as we proceed. So we now move on to discuss the key barriers on the next slide. So let's move on to the next slides. While financing instruments exist, significant barriers continue to constrain climate finance mobilization. So the review identified barriers related to project preparation, governance issues, institutional fragmentation, regulatory uncertainty, limited technical capacity, inadequate climate finance, And the list goes on and on and on and on like that. So many of these barriers interact with one another. So that's a very crucial point, that there's interaction among these barriers, creating systemic constraints that reduce investor confidence and limit access to public and private finance. So when grouped together, these barriers can be simplified into several broad categories. As you can see, we can categorize them. So by categorize them, we can now we can prioritize. We can rank these barriers and prioritize. But what is crucial, so the categories that I'm showing you, I pulled out some of the barriers from the main category, like preparation capacity and complex accreditation procedure. So this is affecting the front line, the development of the project itself. So before it kicks off, that's where the problem is. The complexities of accreditation procedure affects the frontline stage of the project. So understanding these categories is important because addressing only one constraint is unlikely to unlock climate finance. So targeting one of these under these categories will not work. So the next slide actually ranks these barriers based on simple criteria adopted from the literature. So let's move on to the next slide. So based on the simple criteria that you can see on the fig in the right-hand side, the barriers are assessed according to their systematic influence, severity of impact, prevalence across sectors, institutions, and ease of mitigation. So initially we ranked, we ran the frequencies of these barriers and percentages, and our ranking also agree with the frequencies from the 150 records that we identified. So the findings suggest that the governance and institutional coordination issues are among the most influential constraints because they affect project preparation, investment confidence, and implementation effectiveness simultaneously. So governance is at the top of everything. It affects the whole, everything collapses without good governance structures. So this implies that strengthening institutions may deliver greater benefits than focusing solely on new financing instruments. These findings have important implications for social dialogue. So in the next slide, we summarize the implication for social dialogue based on the results from this section. So climate finance is not simply a technical financing issue. It is fundamentally a governance challenge, as we have seen. Effective climate finance requires coordinated decision-making, transparent institutions, strong accountability mechanisms, and stakeholder participation. Social dialogue, therefore, has a critical role to play in ensuring that financing decisions support worker protection, skills development, community resilience, and equitable development outcomes while accelerating emissions reductions. So I now hand over to my colleague, Jeanette, to facilitate the feedback from this session. So this is the end of the first session, and I would like to invite Jeanette to assist facilitating the feedback from this session. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Herbert. And you had to rush through that. My apologies. And you were constrained by the slideshow and sequencing it properly. But I think we got the message. Thank you. Jeanette, I'm just checking if you're on the line, and you only have 10 minutes for this feedback session. Checking if Jeanette is back on the line. Herbert, I just need to check with you if your colleague is here.
Apologies,
Sure.
colleagues.
Thanks.
This,
I was nervous thinking that I had to do the poll
shame,
when
no.
I have
No,
no
no.
experience with
No,
it.
we
So I'll
usually
hand
use
over to you.
Teams. We usually use Teams, and this, yeah, Zoom is, yeah. Okay, so I struggle to unmute. So, can you see my screen?
I can see the screen, but now we have 8 minutes, so I'm going to hand over to you.
Yes. Okay. So I posted the poll as well in the chat, but here is also a screenshot of the, if you want to use the QR code to join the poll. So if you can please either type in this or join via the screenshot. So yeah. So the first question is and maybe if people can just indicate they can see the okay, and yeah, so I will just so the first question we want to ask people to and I will just add it there as well if people want to still find it, is to look at what is your priority question regarding the findings on the existing financial instruments and key barriers. And I know Herbert went through it quite quickly, but if you have any questions that you can add to or can put in there that you feel are important, maybe haven't been addressed or that should be discussed, please can you please add it there in the poll. So I will give you a minute and a half for that. And maybe if people can indicate if they are struggling, perhaps. Let me actually show responses. Okay, we have one response so far. So I'm actually going to show them. Give another minute. You will see that on the poll, you are able to upvote or comment or by emojis on others if there are any specifics that you haven't mentioned, but you feel strong about. You can also use that to just indicate, where you feel happy. Okay, so like 10 seconds, we'll give 10 seconds more. And we'll carry on. Okay. Okay. Thank you. So let's carry on. Take next one. And these ones are just to select. So you've got 1 minute to do that. We might have to go a bit quicker because of time. No, sorry, why is that? Okay. Sorry. So if you can add, any of the findings that you validate. Now, validate means that you agree with them, that you feel that they have been addressed sufficiently in the report. So you will see there are quite a lot of them. if you go down, there are about 15 of them. Yeah. So if you can, and you can choose, you know, as many as you need to. Okay. So we will carry on to the next one. The next one is, which key findings on the key barriers do you validate? There are only 5, so if you can. Okay. I think I might give a bit less time for this one to. Okay. Okay. 5 more seconds. Okay, let's carry on. The next one is again the key financial instruments. And that is looking at the which ones do you flag, meaning you feel they haven't been addressed sufficiently in the report. Sorry about that. Okay, sorry, I'm going back to 1.3a. Okay, so the key financial instruments, which ones? So which ones do you think have not been addressed sufficiently in the report? Do you think there are gaps or should be addressed better? Okay. Let's carry on to the next one.
Just checking how much more time we need, Jeanette.
Okay. I think there's one more, and then there's one sort of typing question. So
if we can wrap it up in the next 3 minutes.
Okay, I will be able to do that. If the presentation just, sorry, I don't know why it's why is it not? Sorry, it was working well. No. This one. Okay, there it is. Sorry, at least people seem to have been able to access it. Maybe my screen is just a bit slow. Okay. To the last one now. Okay, then the last one says, please elaborate on the financial instruments and barriers that were flagged. Say, if you can say why it was not sufficiently addressed and how it can be addressed. Okay, so that's the last one. So you can give, yeah, you can stop when you feel, but we haven't got any responses yet. Yeah, can everybody access?
Can I maybe suggest this, Jeanette, that we go into session 2? People have access to the link.
Okay.
And
Yes.
if anything pops up, they are more than welcome to
Yes, please do.
their response.
Okay.
And if you are struggling
Okay.
with accessing the link or the QR code, please feel free to make use of the chat. It can help us to consolidate your inputs as we consolidate the points coming in from the session.
Right. Okay, great.
So thank you so
so
much. I know you struggled with that a little bit. And again, I rushed you as well. Apologies. We're having to
no, that's
rush
fine.
a lot in just
No, I know, and apologies for that, technology.
That's fine.
Okay.
Herbert,
Should
can
I go
I
to the next?
Sure. I'm inviting Herbert back to take us through the presentation on opportunities. And Herbert, you really went really quickly past the element of social dialogue and what this means, the implications for social dialogue. So I'm just going to ask you to be mindful of the fact that if you could just please spend a little bit of time on that in this session.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Can you move to the next slide, Jeanette? So we are now moving on to the next session, where we are going to present the opportunities for financing just transitions. Then we also look at the case studies that we consider, the results from the case studies and the lessons for South Africa as well. Let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, so the review found that the greatest opportunity lies not in any single instrument, but in combining multiple instruments to generate financing packages. So blended finance structures can generate, can use grants, concessional loans, guarantees, and private capital together to reduce risk and improve affordability. So such combinations can unlock larger volumes of investment, support job creation, enhance social inclusion, and improve the livelihood that climate projects have both environmental and developmental objectives. So this is one opportunity that exists for developing countries, and South Africa can actually embrace this opportunity of deploying the blended finance instruments or platforms. The greatest opportunity lies in combining complementary instruments, grants, concessional finance, guarantees, green bonds, carbon markets, and private capital. So this is done to reduce investment risk, mobilize finance at scale. So private sector will not enter into projects that they perceive to be risk. For example, nature-based projects or projects that are affected by exogenous factors, mostly the projects with very low returns, and there is need for incentives to attract private investment in such sectors. So there's also need to improve affordability of these instruments. So we can blend public and private instruments together to make certain instruments affordable for certain sectors. So they can also be used to support job creation and reskilling and promote inclusive regional development and deliver on socially just and economically sustainable transitions. So this framework basically is showing the opportunities associated with the different columns So mobilizing capital, reducing risk, and improve bankability of the projects, and generating new revenue streams, capacity building, and finally build resilience and adaptation, which is one of the main or most important objectives of climate finance. So the next slide summarizes sector-specific opportunities using a simple framework developed for this purpose. Let's move on to the next slide. Next. So the framework illustrates a multi-sector climate finance ecosystem. So this ecosystem has several sectors that are interlinked with each other. And because of the interlinkages of within the instruments themselves, there are also interlinkages within the sectors. So the complexity of this ecosystem is very important to understand, so that we know how to deploy these instruments, when to deploy them, and which instrument to combine to target certain sectors. So climate finance opportunities exist across energy, water industry, waste management, agriculture, forestry, and biodiversity sectors. So there are opportunities in each and every sector, and these opportunities are presented maybe by projects or programs that are already running. For example, the JET implementation plan. So they've mobilized 8.5 billion, and there's other platforms that are already in place that can be used to mobilize renewable energy production. And if we move on to the water sector, we see that there's DBSA as a major partner. The DBSA Water Partnership Office mobilizes blended finance for water infrastructure, municipality green bonds, finance desalination and water reuse projects. If we move to industrial and manufacturing sector, and if we move to water, things are happening, and these instruments are being deployed in various contexts, and biodiversity and ecosystem as well. We have seen bonds that are being deployed to raise funds in such sectors. So these sectors are interconnected, as I have already explained, and often generate multiple core benefits simultaneously. So effective financing, therefore, requires coordinated policy frameworks, the strong institutions and mechanisms to encourage collaboration between public and private sectors. So the framework demonstrates that climate finance should be viewed as a whole of the economy investment strategy rather than a collection of isolated projects. So when we think about these projects or project pipelines, we should also think about how these projects are connected together and how they can work together to mobilize resources as one unit, not as disjoint projects. So we now move on to present the analysis of case studies and lessons by regions, and on the next slide. Next. So the analysis, next slide. The analysis actually revealed a lot of lessons from Africa, starting with African countries. We considered Gabon, Ghana, Rwanda, and Namibia, and we moved to other regions, Asia, we moved to Latin America or South America. We also considered some developing countries, examples, just to bridge the gap in the coal-dependent regions, examples of how climate finance or innovative financial instruments can be deployed to facilitate transition. So the international case studies reveal several common success factors. What they actually show is that countries that successfully mobilize climate finance generally provide policy certainty. They also provide strong governance systems, transparent procurement processes, and effective risk-sharing mechanisms. Successful projects also relied on strong partnership between governments, development finance institutions, private sectors, and local communities. So local communities should be viewed as key partners, not as bystanders or beneficiaries of projects. Yeah. So for a long time, we have seen projects in communities. Sometimes they are even displaced from their ancestral land for the projects to be implemented. Let's say it's a hydroelectric power plant, and the beneficiaries are residents in urban areas. These communities are still living in poverty, yet they live next to a valuable resource. And they are even constrained by laws and to use the resource for their own livelihood. Sometimes there are laws and bylaws that are put in place that restrict access to such resources. So we are bringing the communities in the picture and also as important stakeholders so that they can also benefit from such type of projects. So these experiences demonstrate that governance quality often matters and as much as financial availability. So it's not about financial availability alone, but also governance aspects. So the next slide presents a comparative analysis of financial instruments and lessons for South Africa. So what do we learn from these case studies? So this framework basically is showing us using the information that we generated earlier to try to synthesize this information further to draw some lessons. So different instruments address different financing needs guided by enabling conditions for success. So the first thing is the enabling conditions. So we need these enabling conditions so that these instruments can to guide these instruments. And you can see how these instruments were deployed by country. So the different instruments under the different, for each objective, mobilize capital, de-risk investments, generate new revenue, protect people and communities. So you can see in first world countries, mostly because this is where pressure groups mobilize and force the government to do the right thing for the communities. So you can see most examples in US, Poland, Russia, they put more emphasis on the community. You can't come and extract a resource in a community and leave the community in that community, the community outside the project. So they should benefit. So green bonds, equity finance, and sustainability-linked loans are particularly useful for mobilizing capital. So this is evidence that is coming from countries such as Brazil, Colombia, Chile, and also limited evidence from Namibia and Rwanda, where they are experimenting. Guarantees, concessional finance and blended finance help reduce investment risk. So we can also see South Africa is popping in, Namibia is also popping in, Japan, Indonesia, and Ghana. And we also see carbon markets and carbon taxes can generate new revenue streams. So there's need for alternative or diversified revenue schemes for the government and for communities. How do we generate more money to fund nature? So Colombia, Ecuador, South Africa, Ghana, Gabon, examples coming from those countries, though in terms of development, fully developed carbon markets, they're still working, it's still work in progress, and South Africa is at an advanced stage in terms of implementing these carbon markets, and grants and transition funds remain important for protecting vulnerable communities. So this is protection, social protection, and developed countries that are doing very good in terms of this. So the framework also highlights an important category of inclusive development enablers. So instruments such as, or platforms such as blended finance facilities, climate finance platforms, and targeted tax incentives can help align climate objectives with broader development goals. So what key message can we draw from this? So the key lesson for South Africa is that financing instruments should be viewed as complements of an integrated financial ecosystem rather than standalone interventions. So they are part of the ecosystem, financial ecosystem. So they should be viewed within the picture, the global picture of the whole ecosystem rather than an independent or isolated intervention. So the next slide synthesizes and summarizes the information from comparative analysis by objectives of the instruments. So this is further analysis that we are doing, looking at the objectives of each instrument. So taking you back a little bit, one of the most important lessons that we draw from the results is that different climate finance instruments serve different purposes within the just energy transition financing ecosystem, and there is no single financial instrument capable of addressing all financial needs. So there's need for this mixture of instruments to work together to complement each other. So successful countries combined complementary instruments to mobilize capital, to reduce investment risk, generate sustainable revenue streams, protect vulnerable groups, and promote inclusive development outcomes. So this is very, very important. The first objective is to mobilize capital using public and concessional finance in green, the first rectangle in green. However, investors often perceive climate projects as risky, particularly in developing countries. So climate projects are generally risky, and this creates the need for a second category of instruments focusing on de-risking investments to attract the private sector. So when we look at the third and fourth and fifth categories, the focus shifts on generating revenue streams that can support long-term climate action and investment in biodiversity conservation. So nature has been neglected. The private sector does not have incentives to invest in nature. So how do we attract them? And how do we generate more money? So we need these diversified sources. So at the same time, a just transition requires specific instruments such as grants, subsidies, and dedicated transition funds to protect workers, communities, and vulnerable groups affected by structural economic change. So as transitions occur, there are going to be these changes that are going to happen. So they are basically intended and unintended consequences, negative and positive impacts. We need to understand who are the winners and who are the losers in this game. And if we identify the losers, we need to safeguard, to put in place some safeguards to protect those losers. So the next slide summarizes the implications for social dialogue. So let's move on to the next slide. So in terms of social dialogue, climate finance outcomes are strongly influenced by stakeholder engagement processes. So this is evidence that is coming over and over in the literature, and more so from the first world countries where the social dialogue is perceived to be a very critical ingredient in everything. So successful programs tend to involve government, labor organizations, business, communities, developed finance institutions, women, youth, local enterprises, and so forth. So no one is left behind. Yeah. So all the important stakeholders need to be part of this, need to be on the train for the instruments to work and to achieve the objective of the transition. So social dialogue is particularly important because it helps build trust and manage conflict. So there are examples of conflict that has happened in different countries that we reviewed, even in first world countries, where a project is actually refused by communities. Yeah, I think we've heard about the popular, the famous project in the US that was blocked for so many. I think it's a oil mining company that wanted to invest in a certain community, and communities refused that project based on pollution, based on negative environmental impacts. So this is a project that it was actually sanctioned by the government, but the community refused it. Despite its benefits in terms of the revenue that is going to generate for the government, for the other actors. So if the community don't see the benefits or a good understanding of how the project is going to contribute to achieving the different objectives, including the environmental protection, then they might not support that project. So there's need to improve accountability and ensure that transition benefits are distributed fairly. So in terms of equitable distribution of benefits, usually it is encouraged to put in place some safeguards. So projects should have socioeconomic safeguards or socioeconomic and environmental safeguards in place so that everything is actually documented and plans are put in place to protect vulnerable groups. And also, there's also platforms and international agreements that guide, like the Nagoya Protocol, how equitable benefit distribution arrangements can be formulated between private actors and communities and all that. And I think South Africa has made very good progress in terms of implementing the Nagoya Protocol on distribution of biological resources. And we have seen this in the Khoisan communities, the rooibos tea, where the company that is extracting rooibos is actually paying some money back to the communities to develop the communities according to some agreed percentages with the communities. So the South African experience suggests that progress is being made in different areas, but stronger integration of community benefits, gender considerations, affordability concerns, and the reskilling programs remain necessary. Yeah, so there's still a need for more work to be done around these areas, community benefits. So when a project is being developed and in communities, there should be ways of sharing these benefits with the community that is living next to the project. And gender considerations. So projects usually they have effects on women. Yeah. For example, if you are implementing a project, clean energy, renewable energy, and this is going to make electricity more expensive. Yet we know the majority of women who are working in the informal sector, for example, those who cook food on the street, they rely on cheap electricity. So these women are going to be unfairly dismissed from the market. And we need to recruit them back on the market. So we need those safeguards so that we recruit those women back. So if electricity is going to be more expensive for those, so some segment of the market is unfairly dismissed. So it's important to consider 4 pillars of this social dialogue and to consider the first the key priorities for social dialogue and also who must be involved in the social dialogue and lessons from South Africa, case studies and international case studies as well, so that we can create an enabling condition for effective social dialogue.
Sure.
So
sorry, Herbert, I'm gonna have to cut you on that. I let us go into this section quite a bit because I think it's crucial for us to make that point, and you made that really well.
Okay. So Yeah, I think I'm done. Now let me hand over to.
Sure, I was going to cue in Jeanette to come in to take us
Yeah.
through the poll. And Jeanette, you do have another 8 minutes. Sorry.
No worries, thanks. Yes, so let's, without further ado, as they say, let's continue. Okay, so in this session, the first one is asking, what is your key question or priority question about funding a just energy transition in South Africa in terms of the case studies and lessons learned that we just heard about from Herbert? So if you can just add your responses, it's the same poll than before. I will give you another minute for that. I don't know if anybody has any questions that they would want to be answered on this one. Don't want to belabor the point, otherwise. Okay, I see there is one. Give another 10 seconds. Can come back to this one as well. Okay, so the second one is again looking at the case studies. Which enabling conditions that can benefit South Africa do you validate? So which of these do you think were addressed well in the report, are important, obviously, and do you think were addressed adequately? Okay, time's up. So we're going to the next one. So if you consider these studies, which conditions would you flag? So which of these conditions do you think were not addressed adequately in the report? I'm going to stop a little bit before because we're running short of time. So I'm going to go to the next one. So what key lessons from the case studies, the ones that Herbert mentioned, would you validate? Would you think were adequately addressed? There are 7. Okay, we're going to the next one. What key lessons from the study would you flag? So would you think were not addressed adequately in the case studies? Not addressed as being addressed adequately in the report. Okay, next one. Which of the sectors would you validate as providing opportunities for linking financial instruments with just transition outcomes? So, yeah. Okay, and which sectors would you flag as providing opportunities so that you think they're not addressed adequately? Go on. And which of the barriers related to financing instruments would you validate? Okay. And which of the barriers related to financing instruments would you flag? Okay. Next one is which of the financing instruments do you validate as providing the greatest opportunity in supporting a just energy transition in South Africa?
Jeanette, as people are putting in their inputs, I'm just checking how much more time you need. 2 minutes.
Okay. I can also just say that the session is much shorter, but we've got, let me just see where we are now. We've got, I think, 2 questions left.
Sure.
Oh, actually 3. No, actually, we've got like 4 left. Sorry, but let me carry on. I'll make it quick so that we at least just go through that. Sorry, not to resume. Okay. Okay, so and which do you flag? I'm gonna just give 20 seconds for this one. And we're carrying on. Then what mechanisms that are required do you validate? Give 20 seconds for this. What mechanisms do you flag? And can you elaborate on the just transition, the case studies and the lessons that you flagged? This is the last one, so I'll give 1.5 minutes. We will win time in the next session. So if you can take some time to think of the ones that you flag, and if you have any reasons for that.
Let me also just add, Janet, that we are going to send the study again, and maybe these questions that require elaboration, we will send those out again.
Yes.
And if there is an input, colleagues can always email that input back to us, because I don't feel we should rush these questions.
No, and I mean, it might be good for people to just go back and look at them again. So yes, yeah. So
look at case studies.
Yeah, so at least now they can just start letting their minds go. Okay, so I'll just give like 20 more seconds, and then we can. If there's anything? Okay, I think shall we continue?
Sure. And just to say, I've seen quite a bit in the chat. I think colleagues are also making use of the chat to respond. It's just that I don't know which numbers relate to which questions.
Oh yeah. Okay,
so
that's
we
fine.
Have to timestamp when the response came in, so that we can make sense of which relates to which. But we're going to have an opportunity to get all of the responses. Colleagues should not stress. Herbert, we're getting into the last sort of session around policy recommendations. I am going to request that we go through it. I'm going to limit a bit of the time for you, Herbert, so you might have only 10 minutes to go through it, so that we can have a bit of time for the reflections and input the ILO as well.
Okay, I think I'll be done within the next 5 minutes. Yeah. So we are now moving on to the next, to the third and final session, as Madam Chair has just said, of the presentation, focusing on policy recommendations, and I also talk a little bit on the actionable projects for social dialogue identified in the review. So the study identified several policy issues, and based on these issues, we also made some recommendations, a lot of recommendations in the report itself. But I would like to summarize 3 of the main that we think are the major policy recommendations or broader policy recommendations. So the study identified 3 overarching policy priorities anchored around social dialogue. So first, South Africa must strengthen the enabling environment through improved policy coherence, regulatory certainty, institutional coordination, and governance systems. So these are very, very important for the climate finance instruments, and also the transition itself. Second, the climate finance must be scaled up through greater use of concessional finance. So blended finance guarantees, green bonds, sustainability-linked instruments, and private investment mobilization. So these are all instruments that can be blended together so they can work together to complement each other, not as substitutes, but as complements to each other. So that's the most important thing to think about these instruments. Then the third recommendation is around just transition principles. Just transition principles must be embedded within all financing decisions. Climate finance should not only reduce emissions, but also create jobs, support workers, strengthen communities, and promote inclusive development. So in summary, this diagram is just summarizing the 3 pillars of for unlocking climate finance for South Africa's just transition, and how social dialogue becomes a central, plays a central role in achieving this, to achieve the outcomes at the bottom. So let's move on to the next slide. So in terms of actionable projects identified for social dialogue, we identified a lot of projects from the Just Energy Transition Implementation Plan. So there are several projects that and we provided examples of them. And based on this list, we also prioritize top 10 based on a criteria that we developed in the report to say these projects can be implemented immediately, and these projects can be implemented maybe in the short term, medium term, and long term, and using different criteria to rank these projects. So the final recommendation is that social dialogue should become more action-oriented by focusing on specific project opportunities. So rather than discussing climate finance in general terms, stakeholders should identify practical projects in areas such as energy transitions, municipal climate finance, local economic development, social protection, and skills development. So all these are examples of projects that the partners can actually implement. So discussions around should focus on who benefits, who risks, or how risks are managed, how accountability will be ensured, and how communities can participate. How do we recruit communities into projects, and also to be a part of the whole process. So the objective is to identify actionable investment opportunities capable of delivering measurable just transition outcomes. Yeah. So in conclusion, climate finance represents a major opportunity to accelerate South Africa's just energy transition while supporting economic development, employment creation, and climate resilience. However, success will depend on stronger government systems, improved coordination, greater mobilization of private capital, and meaningful social dialogue. So social dialogue is also part of the equation and should not be underestimated. I now invite Jeanette again to come back and do the last feedback session. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay, yes, there are only a few for the last session. So the first one is around which broad policy recommendations for financing a just and energy transition do you endorse? There are only 3 options, so yeah. Okay, next one. I guess you can guess which broad policy recommendation do you flag? So do you think are not being addressed adequately? Okay. Next one is which actionable projects for a just and transition do you validate? And then which actionable projects do you flag? This is the second last one. Go to the last one. And we'll give like a minute and a half, yeah, just in case there are any burning things that people want to put on, elaborate on your reasons for flagging these selected findings on the policy recommendations. Okay, let's give 10 more seconds. Okay, we can, I think when you're ready, we can continue. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Ronette, and thank you, Herbert, for taking us through the 3 validation sessions and consolidating those inputs for us. As indicated, this is the first leg at making inputs. We will follow up with an email requesting for additional areas of input. Matilda, we have saved a little bit of time. So I just want to quickly check at your prompting if there are any colleagues on the call who maybe have some questions that they would like to direct to Herbert. Maybe we could open up for 5 minutes to get any inputs that you'd maybe like to raise while we're all here on the platform before we go into the presentation from the ILO and then we wrap up. I don't want you to feel like this has just been a data harvesting process. I don't see any hands raised on my part. There are questions in the chat, in the Q&A. I don't know if you've had a chance, Herbert, to have a look at them.
Not yet.
All right. I think in that case, let's maybe hand over to Matilda, to do just her sessions on synthesis of validated versus flagged findings, and then we can see if we can respond to a couple of Q&As before we wrap up today's call. Matilda, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lebohang, and thank you, colleagues. Good afternoon, everyone, and greetings. My name is Matilda Dahlqvist, and I work at the International Labour Organization's office in Pretoria, where I serve as the national coordinator of the United Nations Partnership for Action on Green Economy, more known as PAGE in South Africa. And I must firstly just thank you all for the rich engagement we've had in the polls, in the chat, in the Q&A. And what I have been asked to do is to share a synthesis of the quite, I would say, innovative engagement that we've had in this workshop on the draft report. And just to say that we decided to opt for this workshop methodology to really ensure that we can get input from as many of you as possible within this limited time we have in our hands. So thank you for collaborating in the polls chat and Q&A. And just to add that the purpose of this segment is not really to necessarily reopen the discussions or open the discussions, but to try to capture and sort of reflect back what I took away from what you validated, what you flagged, and also where there is a clear signal for refinement or follow-up across the 3 validation sessions that we held. And this synthesis, or even more importantly, of course, your actual inputs, which are still coming in, by the way, and which you will also be free to continue to share after this workshop as well. These will inform the finalization of the report, as Lebo also alluded to. And that will also strengthen its usefulness and as an evidence base for social dialogue under PAGE, under the Presidential Climate Commission, and beyond, in order to really help unlock a just energy transition in South Africa. I think regarding the discussion or the engagement in the first session on the study approach, on the financial instruments and the key barriers, I mean, my perception is that findings were broadly validated. Of course, mindful of that it's a lot of information to take in, and maybe not all of you had a chance to also read the report in advance. But what I gathered is that you broadly agreed on the key binding constraints or barriers to unlocking climate finance in South Africa, including, for example, institutional fragmentation, governance issues, financial and economic barriers like limited concessional finance and high cost of capital. And I think some of you also in the chat highlighted the issues around monitoring, reporting, accountability, and implementation. And for me, I also picked a strong consensus that finance barriers are structural rather than due to lack of global climate finance availability. And I also liked the framing of the key message there around unlocking finance, and that it's primarily about good governance structure, institutional readiness, coordination, and not really about designing new policies from scratch as such. I also just wanted to briefly comment the great and quite thought-provoking questions that you have raised in the poll and in the chat and Q&A, including the constraining role of institutions, absorptive capacity in the reception of climate finance. I think we take that point as something that could be strengthened. Also, whether financial instruments are sufficiently contextualized to South Africa's fiscal and state-owned enterprise realities. And I think what has kept coming in is also the need for clearer linkage between barriers and actionable solutions for social dialogue, and clarity on who faces which barriers, where the social dialogue can practically intervene, and to also elaborate more on, again, in a more practical sense, how to improve some of the highlighted challenges. I think I don't want to take too much time, because I also think it would be good to pick on Lebo's offer to also share some more inputs and questions. But just, I mean, similarly, I could though go on the second session to say that I mean, I perceived a strong validation overall on the report's emphasis on the various instruments and the sectoral framing. And I gathered the validation of the key message around that successful climate finance depends on inclusive social dialogue that builds trust, ensures accountability, protects vulnerable groups, and aligns investment decisions with South Africa's just transition objectives. And one thing that I think was flagged for clarification was how transitional technologies are framed, how they are governed, and how they are financed within a just transition narrative. And briefly also on the third session, I felt you validated the framing of social dialogue as a cornerstone of climate finance, not as an add-on, as it sometimes is, and also that finance discussions must explicitly address who bears the costs, the risks, and benefits of the transition. And I think a core message that I interpreted as validated was that climate finance must be viewed as a catalyst for inclusive development rather than simply a source of funding. And you flagged, I noted that there is a need to make recommendations more operational, especially around, who leads, at what level, over what time frame. So I think that is really something that we need to take on board in the PAGE team, and the need also for translating these quite high-level recommendations into very practical social dialogue mandates and follow-up actions. And lastly, I think there was a clear message that climate finance must be judged by social outcomes, not only by the volumes mobilized. And I personally feel that PAGE can play quite a unique role in bridging this evidence, the finance, and the dialogue. So before I pass back the mic to Lebu, I just wanted to say that I think for me, what this validation confirms is that this report, in as much as it's a good read, it's not an academic exercise, but primarily I see it as a tool for institutionalizing a just transition in practice. And that is at the very heart of what we try to do in PAGE. So we need finance that is governed, that is inclusive, that is very dialogue driven. And I think what I gathered as flagged from this engagement is that, and that will help us sharpen this, is how this evidence can really, in practice, support real negotiations, real projects, and real accountability, which perfectly aligns with PAGE South Africa's broader mandate to really move, from the high ambition that is there to institutionalized implementation, where social dialogue, economic transformation, and climate action can really reinforce each other. So, thank you so much. And Lebogang, back to you.
Thank you very much, Matilda. That was a really good sort of characterization of the PAGE program in South Africa and PAGE 2.0, moving from just the broad aspiration around the need for a just transition, but moving that straight into the need to take our just transition journey from framework to institutionalization across sort of the various aspects of our society, which I think is a really important reflection to make. And that's been the ethos of the PAGE program for South Africa. It's that institutionalization that we are seeking to drive for the just transition in South Africa. And we have recognized that social dialogue is the cornerstone of achieving that. And this comes from as far back as the 2015 ILO guiding principles on the just transition that did identify the centrality and the sort of the key role that social dialogue plays in order to allow us to achieve the just transition. And what this conversation has highlighted to us quite explicitly is that even something as complex to wrap our head around, such as climate finance, must still be subjected to adequate social dialogue for us to achieve just outcomes. And I hope that's the key takeaway that colleagues will have as they walk away from this conversation. And just to say thank you to Herbert, Joanette. Joanette, you played a critical role here today. It wasn't just to navigate the tool for us and to get inputs, but it was also to help us think through the various sections of the report and pull out critical areas that drive the intersection between the imperatives for social dialogue as well as climate finance. So just to say thank you to the CSIR team for taking us through your presentation. You've done quite a lot of work, and the synthesis of the report, I think, was really good in how we were able to characterize the issues quite nicely. I liked sort of this idea around ranking the climate finance instruments and ranking the barriers. I think in that ranking as well, we got to kind of, through that methodology, we could see just how, because the issue of governance and institutional barriers has come up quite a bit when it comes to barriers to climate finance, but it was good to see sort of like your methodological thinking towards arriving at that particular conclusion. And also your important assertion around the fact that, no single instrument can finance the transition alone. And we need to think about this in a complementary way. And what was also, I think, really important was around how you looked at the various sort of instruments within a just transition, and also outlining an important pillar around the protection of people as well as the protection of communities. So in terms of process, I think I have already alluded to the process quite a bit as we were going through the discussion. We will recirculate the presentation, and I'm also going to ask the CSIR team if we could also not recirculate, but circulate the slides, and just to pull out some of the questions that required a little bit of elaboration so that colleagues can reflect on them and send us their responses so that we can consolidate that into the updated version. And just to also clarify, just in case it wasn't clear when we did the opening and welcome session, as part of page 2.0, it is the intention to set up a platform for social dialogue where the various social partners can discuss how to best institutionalize the just transition. And these reports are going to serve as a technical input into those processes. So as we had indicated, we did the first validation workshop, and that was around the coal landscape here in South Africa. The second one is around unlocking climate finance and the importance for social dialogues, and examples from other case studies to assist in that dialogue. So these are the processes that we're going to be supporting moving forward. I know there was a question in the Q&A around, how does this work play itself out on the ground? It's working towards helping the social dialogue process and providing that particular technical input around the need to institutionalize the just transition through social dialogue. So with that said, I would like to just wrap things up by thanking the PCC team who's working in the background to assist us with the setting up of the Zoom platform that we're making use of today, as well as the Bridget who's been assisting us with getting everybody on this call here today. I also want to thank the PCC Comms team. I want to thank the UNEP team, Luciana and Josephine. Thank you very much for heading up this work and your collaboration with the CSIR. We really appreciate you for this. And thank you very much to ILO, Matilda, specifically for coming in to provide input for today's session. With that said, thank you very much, colleagues, and thanks for bearing with us as we tested out a very new methodology with you in today's workshop. We promise we'll give you more chance to speak when we have actual dialogue sessions. So thanks, colleagues. Thanks for joining the call, and we will see each of you in the near future. Thank you.